Mr. Speaker, on a cool September morning in Texas, I was driving my Jeep to the courthouse, where I was a judge for a long time. I was listening to KILT radio, a country western station. Willie Nelson was singing Blue Eyes Crying in the Rain. And all of a sudden, Robert B. McIntyre, the newscaster for KILT radio, comes on. He interrupts the program. And he said that an airplane had crashed into the North Tower of the World Trade Center. And that's about all we knew at that time. It was 8:46 Eastern Time, 7:46 in Texas. Continuing my daily journey to the courthouse, a few minutes later, he comes back on the radio and says that a second airplane had crashed into the second South Tower of the World Trade Center in New York City. And the world understood at that time this was serious. This was an attack on our nation, on our country. After I got to the courthouse, we learned that a third airplane flying over Washington, D.C., very close to the building we're in, the United States Capitol, went down the street less than a mile and crashed into the Pentagon. And that was at 9:37 Eastern Time. And then a fourth airplane, we remember it as Flight 93, was flying toward Washington, D.C., probably the Capitol or the White House, where some good, right-thinking folks took control of the plane from a hijacker, and they were crashed in Pennsylvania in some field at 10:07 Eastern Standard Time. Mr. Speaker, on September 11, 2001, this nation was attacked. 3,000 people were killed that day. It's interesting that the attackers decided to attack the World Trade Center because people from 90 nationalities were in the World Trade Center buildings, the South and the North. So it was more than an attack on America, it was an attack on the people of the world. Freedom-loving people, people who believed in living life in liberty. The murder was done by 19 radicals who murdered in the name of religion. Of the 3,000 people that were killed, 411 of them were emergency workers. 341 were members of the New York Fire Department. Also, 2 fire department members of New York who were paramedics were killed that day. 23 officers from NYPD were killed that day. 37 Port Authority officers from New York and New Jersey. And 8 emergency medical technicians and paramedics were killed that day. In the aftermath of that morning, first responders from all over the United States later that week went to New York to help in the recovery and help restore what had happened at Ground Zero. Many of those first responders still suffer from toxins that they acquired while working Ground Zero, as many members of first responders from New York and New Jersey are still suffering. But today we remember all of those people that were killed that day on September 11th. Later that evening, I, like most Americans, was watching television and saw the horror on video of what occurred. And I, like you, Mr. Speaker, saw those thousands of people in New York. When those planes crashed into the World Trade Center buildings, they were fleeing as fast as they can and could from those terror that came from the sky. But there was another group of people, like the fire horses of old, that charged to the smell of smoke and the roar of fire. Those individuals charged to that terror from the sky. There weren't very many, there were a handful, but yet they were there. And of course, who were they? They were the first responders. They were the firefighters. They were emergency medical technicians. They were the paramedics. They were the peace officers. And many of them died that day. And while it's important we remember those that were killed, it's equally important we remember those that got to live, Mr. Speaker, because those first responders charged to that terror from the sky. And many of them gave up their lives so others could live on that famous day.